St. Juan's home for the ADD.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Quan Systems Plays Kerbal Space Program. This is Season 2, Peculiar Inclination, Episode number 1. And we'll just start up here and see what happens. So, we'll talk about the ground rules as we set up the game here. So, Peculiar Inclination. We're going to go career mode and we're going to use the Quan Systems flag here, except for certain situations which we'll talk about here in a moment. And we're going to go in career mode, and our difficulty is going to be somewhat adjusted. We're going to allow reverting flights under certain conditions. And the condition is the spacecraft has to be flying the simulated Quan flag. If we're not flying that, if we're flying this flag, we're not allowed to revert. If we're flying this flag, not only are we allowed to revert, we're required to. We can't have any flights actually generate any records in SimQuan. So our other difficulty modes are allow quick loading, no, miss equipment respawn, no. And we're going to require entry. And then all these things are good. Comm network, and we're going to turn off the decline penalty because I don't want to have any penalty when I decline all the flying missions that I'm going to be declining. So now we look in our further options. Enable Kerbal experience, yes. Kerbals level up immediately, yep, even in space, even during the middle of a flight. Allow debt, no. Part pressure limits, yes. Part G-force limits, yes. Kerbal G-force limits, yes. We're not going to worry about crossfeed rules because that adds another constraint to building the spacecraft that I don't know about, and I don't know enough to design around. So we're going to always allow action groups because I just hate having to spend like 400,000 space bucks in order to get action groups. And building impact damage multiplier, we'll leave it what it is. Part upgrades, yes. Okay, CommNat. Yes, require signal for control. Yes, allow plasma blackout. Occlusion multiplier for vacuum is going to be 100%. And for atmosphere is going to be 98%. And we're going to turn off extra ground stations. And we're going to make sure that we do not allow other launch sites. Season 1 was called Bring Your Own Comm, and the primary rule in that one, aside from the you only count missions flying the right flag, the other thing was there's only one ground station, the one at the Kerbal Space Center. And in order to extend communications further than that, you have to build your own in-space communications network, which is one of the fun things to do. So that's what I did. And this time around, we're going to enforce the peculiar inclination rule. We'll talk about that in a moment here when we start. As you may or may not know, the Kerbal Space Center is sited to be exactly on the equator. In fact, I haven't looked it up yet, but I think that the equator runs north of the launch pad and south of the runway, so right about here. Maybe right through the spaceplane hangar, maybe right through mission control. But in any case, the launch site's close enough to the equator that if you launch due east, you end up in an equatorial orbit, which is really easy to do rendezvous, to do lunar excursions, to do things like that. But I don't always like easy, so we're going to set up a ground rule that the range is closed between about 46 degrees and 134 degrees. So we're allowed to launch at 45, but we're not allowed to launch at an azimuth of 90. And that will result in us always having inclined orbits, which will make rendezvous a lot more interesting. It'll make building space stations a lot more interesting. And it'll be a lot more realistic because no launch site in the world except for sea launch is ever on the equator. And we saw how sea launch worked. We saw how successful that was. So first thing we're going to do is not build a rocket. Since we're in career mode, the first thing we're going to do is go over here and pick up some missions. We only have enough now for 2, so we're going to just do the 2 that we have. And we're going to build Trinity. Trinity is pretty traditional. It's the first spacecraft that I built in the previous season, but I mean, it is pretty simple, and it is pretty much the one that everyone builds on their first mission. So we're going to put Jeb in the cockpit, and we're going to do action groups. We're going to set up, for button number 1, we're going to set up Observe Mystery Goo, and we're going to set up Crew Report, and that's all the science we can get for now. So that's all we're going to do. So we'll save that, and we'll launch. And this mission, we're not even really going to launch. All we're going to do is run the science experiments, because that's all we have to do in order to complete the first contract. We'll recover it on the launch pad, and when we do so, we get 100% of the value of the rocket back. So this time, we're actually going to fly it. But before we do that, don't have enough money to upgrade yet, but we're going to take another contract. Now, we don't have enough reputation yet to get any external contracts, so we do have to go fly at least one mission, and we have to actually launch this mission. So we're going to be brave, and we're going to run it in normal mode, because as I've said, this is not my first season. This is not my first time flying Kerbin, and I know that Trinity works, and works pretty well. One thing that we do have to do is check staging. Otherwise, we get that embarrassing, we fire the parachute at the same time we fire the engine. And that is embarrassing. So we'll turn on the SAS, and 3, 2, 1, fire! And we're going to follow our mission rules of staying within the range. We're not going to go straight up. We're instead going to go out over the ocean. We'll take our science. Now, when we slow down here to blow about slower, I'll go ahead and do an EVA. Nope, can't do an EVA. We're just gonna fire the parachute. And check out all the things that we've done. So, we already got all these world's first milestones. We got a bunch of reputation, a bunch of science, and a bunch of funds for all that. Yep, our very first launch for this season, very first launch for this iteration of Jeb. But by no means is it my first launch. So, a little bit about what happened last season to bring you all up to speed. I got through about 13 episodes of rambling and stumbling and bumbling and fumbling along, learning how to do this wonderful thing we call YouTube, or whatever streaming service I end up putting this on. Whatever video service I end up putting this on. And got up to episode 13, and when it came time to make episode 14, I killed a Kerbin. I killed Val. She had safely landed on the surface of the Mun, but the rocket tipped over because it was too tall for the size of its legs. And in order to try to get up, I decided, let's just throttle up the engines and try and pitch up and try and get out of here. And when I did so, predictably the rocket exploded and took Kerbal with it. And I just couldn't bring myself to shoot the funeral episode. So I ended up abandoning that season completely. So we're almost down to parachute deploy altitude. And NASA does that at about 5 kilometers, so quite a bit higher up. And there's VAB off in the distance, and there's the monolith. But anyway, in this episode, in this season, we have some goals. Aside from the peculiar inclination, our goal is to make this species interplanetary. We're going to follow the Musk way, we're going to follow the Musk goal, and get ourselves out to at least to Duna, and maybe others. So, I happen to know that the Duna launch window doesn't open until about, I want to say 180 days, but I also want to say over a year. I think it's like 180 days to the Duna launch window. So we've got until then to get enough science and enough funds to build an interplanetary rocket. We're going to use contracts mostly to gather funds, but we're also going to do our own program here where we're going to deploy. We're going to deploy our own communications network, and we're going to do our own gathering of science in order to do that, and then we're going to gather science from the targets that we feel like, and we're going to reject all of the focused ones, because I hate aircraft. I was watching a streamer just last night who was much better at building and flying an aircraft than I am. But he didn't know the trick about building a science car and rolling around to every building on KSC to pick up science. We'll do that at some point, but I might not do it on screen. So, keep declining. No focused observational surveys. Whatever. We are going to take that one. And what else do we want to take? We're definitely going to take that one. And well, the first thing we're going to do is upgrade. Now we can take more. Because I happen to know how to build an orbital rocket. In previous seasons, it's taken me more than once to get up there, but I know the design now. I know it by heart. So we're just going to do it. So we're going to call this one Crossroads Able. Very expectantly call it a orbital class rocket. The first thing that we're going to do is go spend all of our science that we just gathered. So we want basic rocketry. Well, we're going to get that part anyway. We need a fuel tank. We like a slightly bigger fuel tank and the thumper. And then what else can we get? Engineering. This one will get us a decoupler, which we already had. But it'll also get us an antenna and a thermometer, which will allow us to get more science. So we'll go ahead and do that. And we're going to upgrade the launch pad, because I happen to know that we're going to need the bigger launch pad in order to fly this thing. So, why you no heat shield? What do I got to do to get heat shield? Survivability, 15. Now, is there a contract that uses a heat shield? Here's one that uses a small heat shield. Dagnabbit. Okay, well, time to go build the science car then. So we want one of those. And put some science on it. And because we are just using this thing for farming science, this one spade. Simplest farming tool I can think of. We'll get back to that. We'll fly that one in a moment, but I'm going to see if we have enough funds to upgrade Astronaut Complex. Looks like no. So okay, we would need the upgrade for both of these in order to be able to pick up surface samples. So we're going to go out and deploy the spade with a scientist. See if we can scum enough science from this in order to... Might have to fly Trinity again with the thermometer. But we definitely want enough science to get a heat shield, so we need like 13 more points of science. Crew report. Mystery goo. Thermometer. EVA. Now how much science do we have? 11 science collaboration points. Still not quite enough. Probably shouldn't have got... No, I needed that one too, because I needed the booster. So we gotta go scum a few more science collaboration points. I think we'll do that with the improved Trinity. Improved by hanging a thermometer on the side of it. Might even fly this one. In order to get some of that juicy science from in flight. That might be enough. Oh, so close. We'll go ahead and fly that one. But yeah, my previous take on this one, yeah, this is a previous take, or this is a it's actually the third take on this first episode here. I won't be doing that in the future, but what I did before, I had to set up my new system, and right now we are running in Linux. We're running on a Ryzen 3200G and no video card, but being in Linux, we're trying out our new recording solution. Instead of using the Windows Shadowplay that comes with an NVIDIA card, we are using the OBS program which doesn't require any video cards or anything like that, or doesn't require the Windows program. Of course it requires a video card. But the 3200G has its own onboard Vega graphics. It's not nearly as good as even my 7-year-old GTX 770, which I used to use, but we'll get there. So, ready for action? Ready for launch? 3, 2, 1, hip hip! Woo! Stay in the range, stay in the range. Okay, there we've got plenty of science collaboration points. But yeah, my previous computer was Intel 4960 that was from 2014. And the video card is at the same time, but it's still a decent machine. It's been repurposed, and this machine, I'm intended to grow it. So my previous machine used DDR3 memory because that's what there was, and I got right at the tail end of DDR3. I got on board that system, and so then a couple years later, AMD comes along with Ryzen. And they're promised to be upgradable and stuff, and so after a while I was finally able to scrape together enough budget to get a Ryzen, and once I do, well, it turns out DDR5 is coming up pretty soon, so socket AM5, all the 5s are coming up. So I got this wonderfully upgradable system that I can buy extra parts for as I choose. But it seems like I got it right at the tail end of its upgradability. Oh well, such is life. So I'll grab some EVA report from this, board the rocket again, and recover, and we'll have enough science. Trinity 2 will bring home the science. Trinity 2 brought lots of science. Okay. We'll see if this Mark I capsule is as strong as the aluminum can we use for a sounding rocket.